I'm Wihbey. I'm an associate professor here at Northeastern. I've worked with Mike for a number of years on various iterations of this project, and we are thrilled to have one of our kind of co-conspirators here, as well as a fellow academic colleague. So I'll introduce both of them in just a second, but I wanted to say a couple words about just how important I think this work is. I came out of radio and digital and print, and so TV has never been my native medium, but I've just learned a ton over the years and tried to help support Mike and the students as they've really developed, I think, a unique academic project that is incredibly industry engaged. This model of putting people into stations and then reflecting on that and studying it, I think is entirely consistent with Northeastern's experiential education model. So I'm really proud to be associated with it. But I mean, first of all, I just want to say thanks to Mike for leading all of this over the years, and maybe a round of applause for Mike. Also thanks to the Stanton Foundation. They'll get a bunch of shout outs over the next couple of days, but they've really been essential in powering this work and supporting us. So without further ado, a couple folks are here on the panel, and then I'll throw it over to Lisa. First of all, I'll introduce Keren Henderson. She's an associate professor at Syracuse University, a broadcast instructor, and she's been doing some incredibly important work in leading for decades, this survey, the RTDNA survey, which has really given us a strong sense of what's going on from a data perspective within the industry. And she and Bob Papper have been co-leading that, and I understand, Keren, that you'll be directing it shortly. So congratulations, and that's really important work in terms of orienting us. And then a few words about Seth Geiger. Seth has become a friend and a colleague and an advisor. He's one of the most influential people in the TV business. So we're just really lucky to have you as I said, a co-conspirator, but also just like a very wise sage, alongside of us on this journey.
That sounds like old.
Yeah.
I think you're in way better shape than I am, though you might be even a few years older. So I think it's not old; it's wise. And Seth also brings some real academic chops. He has a PhD in comm from some place called Stanford, but he decided to go into industry and really, I think, has influenced the way TV news has evolved over time. And so Mike first connected us, and it's just been like a revelation to have somebody who has really a 360-degree view, because he talks with people across all of the stations and is really trying to help people reinvent and bring innovation to the stations. And so we also, contract formally with Seth and his firm to help us with research, to do some video experiments with audiences, to do some focus groups, to do some surveys. So we're really lucky to have a project that has someone who's a broker, a real knowledge broker between the industry, academe, and various other stakeholders. So without further ado, Lisa, I'm going to throw it over to you, as the TV lingo goes, and thanks again.
Hey, everyone. We already met earlier, but again, I'm Lisa Thalhamer. I'm a grad student here at Northeastern. My background is local TV news. I spent more than 15 years as a newscast producer for stations in Maine, New Hampshire, and here in Boston. And this project is really what brought me to Northeastern. I remember the time I read the first report that Mike and John put out, and they were talking about the challenges and the fact that viewers were not going to just show up the way at that time executives were claiming they would, that millennials, and then I don't know if we had really named Gen Z yet. People weren't thinking of them as television viewers yet, but we were telling this story, right, about millennials are going to age into this. And my experience from my friends and my siblings was, no, they're not. And we need to talk to people where they are. And so I remember reading that first report and just feeling electrified. And I'm pretty sure I chased down Mike in a very aggressive way in the newsroom to be like, this thing, it's amazing. Let's talk about it. So all these years later, here I am working on it. And so I'm really excited because Keren and Seth, as somebody who's worked in local TV, I've interacted with your work a lot. The RTDNA survey always told me that while my salary was bad, it was normal bad as a TV producer. So that was horrifying and reassuring at the same time. So I'm really excited for you guys to share all this great information with us. And so Seth, you want to get us started with what we know from our data?
I'm better when I stand than when I sit, so I'm going to make the camera people up here look crazy. But look, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to see the level of enthusiasm and infectiousness that is certainly infused in this room. I'm going to start with just a really simple concept, and that is local news is a very entrenched and established, and in many ways, I would say conventional institution that's critically important to America that has simply not evolved as quickly as its audience has. And so just about every local newsroom in America is playing catch up. And to see these types of projects that will be able to seed and now germinate some of the fresh thinking and approaches is so important and so powerful around what we do. I'm going to just share with you a way that we tend to bifurcate on behalf of our clients, a focus around the newsroom. And there are two broad categories. One I'll refer to as news I need. Those are things like breaking news, and the breaking news cycle starts that process. It's certainly the utility of weather and traffic and the things that will help keep me safe and help me plan. And much of local news historically has focused on that news I need component, and it's still critically important. And I want to also give you a sense that those kinds of things are just about as important to 20-somethings as they are to 50-somethings. There's really not a dramatic difference in terms of the story selection, if you will, but where the divergence happens is in the form of the storytelling. And every platform demands a unique or, to a certain degree, distinctive approach to these kinds of things. Telling a story on TikTok, as you heard from the previous group, is very, very different than producing a story for linear TV. Historically, linear took the precedent. It came first. It created all of the conventions that define local news today. And then, sadly, when digital became an opportunity, it was really treated primarily as either a threat and a disruption or a promotional platform, not as a platform to be embraced in its own right, with its own set of conventions and understanding. And that has really hurt local news in the adoption rates and the success in delivering across all of those platforms. We're certainly beyond that today. Just to give you some context, and I promise I will give you the number 2 category of news in a second. Okay. Folks in front of a TV set today spend about an hour and 19 minutes more streaming than they do watching linear TV, cablers, broadcasters, in other words, traditional television in pattern. And Nika brought up, I think, TiVo. Many of you may have never experienced a TiVo. I personally did the first research project where we put TiVos in homes in suburban Maryland and assessed what the impact was. So I've been around long enough. John is absolutely right in terms of my age. I've actually tested every digital platform in the history of the media industry. And we've been the first in almost all cases to test and understand those dynamics. So I'm going to share that context with you today. So the reality is, it's less about story selection, and it's far more about story form and creating conventions that are organic and consistent with the specific platforms that you're utilizing. And that's a challenge. Now we're playing three-dimensional chess instead of producing content for linear television and then migrating it over to a platform. We need to think about creating content that's specific, even if it might be similar kinds of stories. And the bodega piece we tested, that tested exceptionally well. That was alluded to in the previous panel. Another piece that tested exceptionally well was talking about pandemic. Obviously, adopting pets became a big thing as folks were effectively locked into homes. A story about a pet shelter, and at the end of that story, the reporter adopted a dog. And so you can't be more authentic than creating that particular sensibility around that. And those things resonate heavily, but that actually is now coming back to inform the nature of conventional linear television. And so it's elongating, it's creating more elasticity to the form, and it's in a lot of ways, it's becoming the experimental platform that's allowing even traditional television to evolve in meaningful ways. So there's this whole news I need category, and we talk about elongation. There's what we call the news for me. These are things that are helpful in my daily life, but also connect me to my community, that bring accountability into the community, demand answers from local officials. That's not a news cycle, that's a solution cycle, and I'll talk about why that's important in just a second. Both of these are meaningful, and if there's a difference on a generational basis, it's that the news for me pieces, I would say, are almost equally in weight as the news I need pieces. There's another critical thing that I want to bring to bear between the generations. So for baby boomers, even millennials to a degree, news is about being informed. If we're talking about the younger generations, it's not just what I need to know, but it's where I should stand and potentially what I should do. There's a far more engaged relationship with news beyond just the informational role and component. And so that's critically important as well. So I'm going to share a couple of data points with you that really underscore these themes. I'm actually happy to take questions as we go through it. There are really 4 critical macro trends. Some of it's afforded by just the expansion of just the volume of news sources that are out there. This is pretty astounding. The average American touches 10.4 news sources every day. Now, a lot of that is news that finds me. It's a news alert. It's a notification, it's an email. It's not necessarily something that they have to do, it's something that just flows through the natural ecosystem around that. And of those 10.4, about 8.8 are digital platforms on average. So the first thing is, we're in a world of news fatigue. This last 9 years really has been exhausting. And we're all exhausted, and the audience is exhausted. But things had been so important, especially through the pandemic, that usually news fatigue correlates with news avoidance. I have to shut it down. That didn't happen because it was so important, but in 2024, it did happen. Folks could no longer put the time and the effort in. That doesn't mean that they didn't get those 10.4 things, they just weren't devoting as much time. And the medium that was most impacted by that was linear television. So 2/3 of linear TV viewers used to watch local news every day. If you were watching once a week, you were almost certainly watching every day. Now it's just about 1 in 4. And in part, that's because there's so much more fragmentation, so much more available information around that. Here's the metric now. It's 57%. That's been very fluid and dynamic. So just before the pandemic, it was about 63% of Americans turned to a local newscast on a daily basis. If I go back 12 years, let's say 2012, it was close to 72%. So there had been erosion prior to that. The pandemic changed everything. Within the first week of the pandemic, people were so confused and so challenged to navigate what actually was going on in America that 91% were using local news. Now we're back down to 57%. So it's absolutely elastic. Amongst 18 to 24-year-olds, it's 37%. I don't know if that surprises you. I don't know how many who is in that 18 to 24-year-old demographic watched a local newscast in the last week. Okay, that makes it easy. All right, I didn't either when I was in school, but there you go. Within that. This is in perhaps the most impactful, and that is news is not the purview anymore of news brands. News cycles start on social media, and even though established news brands try to create branded content within that environment, the reality is I'm getting my news on Facebook or I'm getting my news on YouTube. It's really hard for the individual news brand to cut through that clutter. And it creates a real challenge in terms of attribution. Obviously, local TV stations are investing in that 1.2 million of TikTok views that CBB got recently.
But
that doesn't necessarily mean it leads to a greater affinity for that television station. So there's a fundamental disconnect that happens there as well. Again, 61% of 1824s first learning about news on social media. I talked a little bit about, we have both a frequency and a reach problem. So now we're back down to 57% watching local news on a weekly basis. Only about 1 in 4 of those, or about 14% of Americans, show up every day for a local news program in any day part. So local news is no longer a habit, it's situational. If there's a reason to turn to local news, I will. Sometimes that's because the news cycle or the weather patterns are heightened, but generally it's going to be a function of I saw something on social media or I got an alert and now I've got a reason to flow through it. So if we're not feeding the news cycle as an industry at that level and then triggering these other behaviors, the whole ecosystem falls apart. So you can see how important this type of storytelling really is. I'm going to talk a little bit today about trust. So this is going to be provocative. There is a trust crisis in America today. You're going to be astounded by some of the numbers I'm going to share around that. The first week in January, we did our first wave of what will be a quarterly tracker that we're going to do probably for at least the next 4 years for obvious reasons. But there is a trust crisis. Every institution in America is under siege and underwater when it comes to trust. The only national institution, actually local institution, where 50% or more of Americans say, I trust it completely or mostly, is your local library. Everything else falls below 50%. And so that's a huge challenge. And what it means is really trust and brand affinity is not the driving force dictating what news sources people are turning to. It's convenience. And social media drives convenience. That's dangerous because then you don't know which news sources are trusted. There's a lack of credibility that comes with that connection. And then just a quick data point again about those 1824s. Half paid attention to the election. During the election cycle, and social media was their #1 source of information. Pretty scary. Because the least trusted news platform in America is social media, for obvious reasons. But usually if you don't trust something, you don't use it. That's not how this functions. So that relationship doesn't exist. All right, we're shaking our head. It seems very concerning. That may feel like a woe the republic moment for you. This is how long I've been around. So I did the original the research for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel Company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. That was a morning and an afternoon newspaper back when those things existed. That you can really tell how old I am. And it's actually the oldest public corporation in the state of Wisconsin. And I did the research and I came back and I said, you got to close the evening paper. There's no future. And the editor of the paper did exactly what you did. And his quote was, woe the republic. 30 years later, or whatever it is, woe the republic. This is where we are now. Okay, I'm going to speed it up here. Here's what we're seeing. So younger consumers really, the kinds of stories they want aren't that different from the rest of the news audience. But they're consuming it in different ways, and that's demanding a different relationship to those particular platforms. So I think it's less about what you cover and more how you tell those stories across this very broad ecosystem within that. I talked about the news I need and the news for me, more of a balance between those. News avoidance is huge, part of that news fatigue that we talked about, and that's really impacted by brand allegiance. I also mentioned this fourth point. News is more than information. It's about self-identity and what should I do. So that's actually very encouraging when you think about it. It's not just a sit back or lean back position. This is really not about abdicating responsibility. It is about learning what I need to do potentially to be more connected and more responsible. And of all the institutions in America certainly all the media platforms in America, if we're going to get our way out of this existing problem that we have, of this pandemic of distrust, local news is going to be the single most important platform to get us out of it. Because it is the most trusted media platform. It connects you to your community. When you see real people in your world, which is why authenticity and changing the relationship and how you portray and put your talent into the marketplace becomes so important, we're going to be able to develop and cultivate those things. I just pulled a couple of quotes. John alluded to this, but we did some research recently that looked at a lot of the work that these fellows produced and performed. And you can see the relationship and the way these 21 and 31-year-olds think about how they get local news is completely different from if you talk to any news executive, how they would think about the way to serve their audiences. So the previous panel is exactly right. We've got to figure out where to find people. Oh, that's kind of weird. Okay, I don't know why I did that. But just some context. Everybody in America is a streamer. It's 96%. I should also say that this data came from data collection we did on this trust project. For the first week in January, our next wave will be in 2 weeks. If there's a undergrad thesis or a master's person who would like to use this data for their thesis, I will make this available, and we will have multiple waves. It's something worth mining. It's a true national sample. Every wave we do about 1,250 nationally. Smart TVs are endemic. I don't know why it's weird that the percentage is wrapped up differently on that, but there's no differences young to old, is what I'm trying to illustrate within this. Oh, that's too bad. Okay, this teal bar is your 18 to 24s, that line. So what's the #1 news source in America for every age group, with the exception of the 55 to 64-year-olds? It's social media. So this is the cesspool we live in right now, and we're not going to get out of it. So our job is, how do we clean that cesspool? That's the reality. If you look at the local news, there's about a 25-point gap between young and old. There's the 37% of younger audiences. I don't know why the animation didn't follow through on this, but that's okay, no worries. So again, you can see network news in the evening, network news in the morning, but there's not that big a gap between younger and older. It's only about 10 points. So again, this sense that younger folks aren't participating in these kinds of things, not necessarily true. But what's happened is network news for 45 to 64-year-olds used to be up here. It's come back to the rest. So let's just be realistic about those options. Here's social media usage amongst those 18 to 24s that we look at. The first bar in that stack is multiple times a day. So Instagram, over half are on Instagram multiple times a day, 43% on TikTok, 31% on Snapchat. On average, it's 3.2 social media platforms every day. Yes?
Where does YouTube fit in that universe?
YouTube is, we actually put in a different question, but right now, I'm glad you asked that. The most important social media platform for distribution for local television is YouTube. It's driving most of the traffic. It's less mediated in terms of being able to post and get content out there than a Facebook, for example. So critically important. And so we're encouraging all our clients to make YouTube the #1 digital priority.
So in that previous slide, YouTube would be included in.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
Actually, on the previous slide, streaming news channels, the third bucket there from the left, how is that defined vis-a-vis local news programs? Like, because local news has streaming.
That's correct. We tended to aggregate that up. So that would include the CBS Live, the ABC Live 24/7, as well as the streaming local news. It is a growing bucket. In a lot of ways, it will, if it hasn't already, eclipse the importance of websites and news apps moving forward. And the amazing story about streaming news apps in a local environment, especially those designed for TV, is two things. One is we find that it quickly becomes a habit because of the power and all the momentum that's flowing into these streaming platforms themselves. And then secondarily, it is a duration platform. So we're seeing anywhere from 35 minutes on an average tune to a social media platform to, in some cases, an hour and 10 minutes, depending on the day part.
It's retention.
Absolutely, and it's also reinforcing. So the more time you spend on streaming platforms, when you're in a linear environment, more likely you are to turn to that local station's brand on linear as well. Yeah, Nika?
So to your question, so is that just like the ABC7 Chicago app on your smartphone, or is that streaming on our site, or is it?
It's an aggregation of Hulu. This is where it gets complicated. An aggregation of Hulu and specifically the streaming news app that you would download on Roku, on Apple TV, on those devices. Okay.
The fast channels.
Fast channels as well. Although that's not quite as impactful, but Tubi is a player for CBS. I mean, so it's a very, very complicated ecosystem right now, and it's complicated for the users as a challenge. So just a couple other things I want to share with you. There's the distribution of social media. What I wanted to show you here is just to illustrate the depth of news avoidance. So 79% of the 18 to 24-year-olds are turning away from multiple news sources in the past 90 days. So that's basically from election onward. And it's varied. The least likely to be turning away from, although it's still in the mix, is social media, and you can see YouTube or TikTok within that. And it's really resilient. So we're actually using social media more or less often, 2 to 1 more often for the younger demos. For social media, for local news, it's effectively flat. I want to get into this trust issue. And then I'll turn it over. I'm sorry if I'm going long here. But again, the younger demo is that teal line. So focus more on news if it provided me with information that I trust. All age groups agree with that. And you can see there's not that significant a difference. Following the news is a daily habit. That's a 20-point gap between young and old. But it's still 44% of the younger demographic. Makes me anxious and stressful between 41 and 51%. 48% of the younger demo, exhausted by the constant flow of information. Guess who's on their devices for longer durations? 53%. We have a protocol where we can put an app on your phone, and believe it or not, people agree to do this, and we take a screenshot every 5 seconds of what you're doing. And then we analyze all those screenshots. Yeah, old people won't do that. Older people, sorry. I'll put myself in that category. But younger people are like, what the hell, you're going to pay me $400? I'll do that. And we know they're not changing their behaviors because we see their banking behaviors, and there's a whole lot of social dating sites that are going on in these things, amongst other things. So there's no self-editing. I can guarantee that, okay? So avoiding the news is a way of protecting myself. This is a phenomenon that's happening right now. It's dangerous if people shut down in this environment. Here's the trust quotient in America today, and this is what I mean by trust crisis. The red is the percentage who don't trust these institutions. The column at the right, if it's in the red, means there's a higher percentage of Americans who don't trust than do trust. The least trusted institutions, Congress and social media. And there's almost no difference between Congress in general and my congressperson, which is a relatively new thing within the mix here. Local news does okay. It's a net plus of 21 within that. But you can see your local library, but it's all local institutions that have the greatest net positives. So the path back to trust is going to happen at the local level. Let me show you what it looks like. Yes?
What's the differentiation between like national and local? Is there more trust on a national level?
Yeah, it's 12 points difference. You can see local TV news is at a 41, trust completely or mostly. Network TV is at 29. Okay. Cable right at about the same. I didn't include the chart, but there's not that big a difference between Democrats and Republicans. Everybody's scared right now. Everybody's anxious. Here is a breakdown by age, and again, the teal is the younger. There's no differences by age group. The whole country feels this way. So again, I just want to return to the original concept, and that is younger news consumers get their news in different ways, but express the same kinds of feelings, the same kinds of concerns, and the same kind of issues within that. Again, we've never seen institutions this far underwater in terms of trust. And again, it's just going to feed that. Here's the power of social media, but everybody from 18 to 44 is first learning about news stories on social media. Then that triggers other types of news behaviors within that. So I'm going to leave you with a distressing pair of slides. I know, I'm just a bearer of good news today. I didn't create the situation, I just diagnosed the situation. So this is how the world used to work, not that long ago. And this is why the news medium was so critically important. So we would report on the facts. Those facts, because it was delivered by a trusted newsroom, were generally unassailable. Facts led to a sense of that was the truth. The truth engendered a level of trust. And those things together created your perception of what the world was about, or your social reality. This whole thing is now turned on its head in a world of fragmented news. And social media is the one opportunity where we can bring audiences together. Now, it starts with social reality. So I'm only going to utilize news sources that conform to my belief system. If it somehow conflicts with those beliefs, it's out of my exposure. And Facebook has perfected that process, and by instituting that algorithmic approach, is reinforced this very phenomenon that we see. So I'm avoiding news sources that don't agree with my belief structure. I'm focusing only on those that reinforce it. If it fits my belief structure, I can trust it. If I trust it, it's truthful, and if it's truthful, those are the facts that I'm buying into. That's today's world. It's a very scary proposition, yes.
I see an interesting breakdown there for Republicans versus Democrats.
Yes.
I know one of the biggest voting blocks is independents. Have you done any testing in relation to?
The independents are more aligned with the Democrats than the Republicans. But I can also tell you from our research, the Republican Party, self-identification in the Republican Party surged in the last 12 months. So this just provides a context for why what we do at the local news level is so critically important. This is not the stepchild to the network news. This is the most important local news institution in the country, and why it's so critical that it stays healthy, that it continues to evolve and innovate, that the kinds of processes, especially in a world of social media first, means it's not just important to the industry, it's important to the country that we embrace those things and execute those at the level where it feels native to each platform, not something that we're trying to conform or contort into a platform from a linear world. And that's where we are today. Yes.
Can we hold our questions for just a couple minutes? I'd like to give you more numbers that will concern you before I see that you have many questions. I would love for you to ask them all, but I just want to, for the sake of the rest of our day, we're going to go to, because you're wrapped up. Yes, Seth?
Yes, I'm good.
I'm going to pull up Keren's slides, and Keren's going to get rolling for us, and then we're going to do more questions.
Thank you.
Well, while we're bringing it up, I'll just say, as a former local TV news producer and video editor, I like the safety of a desk, so I'm probably not going to get up and walk around like that. So I was going to start with a little conversation. I really feel like we'll skip it so that we can get to the meat. But I will say quickly, for anyone who's quite young in the room, RTDNA stands for the Radio Television Digital News Association, and you would probably know it best as the organization that hands out the Murrow Awards, if that's helpful to you. For everybody who has been a news director or in the business long enough would probably know their annual survey, which is soon to be my annual survey, often referred to as the Papper survey. Bob Papper not able to attend today, so I represent us. You're welcome. No, I'm kidding. So the state of news, these are the main points that I'm going to hit on, but I will do them relatively speedily so that we can ask some questions of both of us. Firstly, this fun fact. So there are, I'll just direct your attention to certain spots here. There are 1,117 total stations running news in this country at this time, which is up 6 points from last year, which sounds good until I break it down to the blue and red lines on that chart, which is to say that 422 stations run local news, but they get that news from somewhere else. So they're not newsrooms, they are repeating something from somewhere else. 695 stations of the 1117 actually originate local news. So that's down by 2. 422 is up by 8. So we end up with up by 6 in total. Depends, I guess, how you feel about that. But in that same selection, we have 6.5 hours of weekday news on average, but that did in fact fall by 12 minutes per weekday. So we do have an unchanged median of 6.5, but it is 6.5 hours on average of news. We only expect 15%. I mean the news directors who answered our survey, only expect the amount of news to increase. 15% of people who answered our survey said that they expect it to increase in the coming year. 6% said they expect to decrease the amount of news that they're producing, and 70% said they don't expect any change. Now, obviously these are guesses, but I imagine they are smart guesses, educated guesses. Related to what you were talking about. So I showed this to my students recently because, of course, they're interested in what people are doing on social media. And we did ask who is using Twitter, X, and it looks like about 40% of newsrooms are really not using it anymore. Now, I will point out that there are non-commercial stations that answer our survey as well, so it's entirely possible that NPR is a large contributor to that statistic, since they so publicly announced that they weren't going to use it. But we, again, see about 40% of the stations saying that they're not using it. Similar to what you had pointed out, we do see Instagram and YouTube as leaders in the digital platform space. TikTok not terribly far behind considering the up and down that is TikTok availability lately. I do think, I had a student ask me about Blue Sky. Why is Blue Sky even making the survey enough to show up? The fact is, if you are an NPR station and you're not using Twitter, Blue Sky is so similar, they still have content that they know how to produce for that type of platform, and so they don't want that knowledge to go to waste, right? That skill to go to waste. That's my good guess as to why Blue Sky had such a large number. But Threads, Snapchat, and I forget exactly what I think WhatsApp was one of the others, and LinkedIn was another one of the others. Not surprisingly, streaming is up. I didn't know what fast channels were because I've been out of the business for a while, and this was a good excuse to Google something. So I learned about fast channels this year because I don't remember anyone referencing them the year before in this way. So they surely mentioned streaming, but they didn't refer to the channels as fast channels, and so I had an occasion to learn what that meant. and that they call the newscasts for fast channels fastcasts. So that's fun. AI, we asked last year and this year, just trying to get ahead of a trend, who's using some form of AI, who's doing something. And the something went up this year, but sometimes the something is nothing. So sometimes people say we're doing something, and by something they mean we banned it, which is not the answer to my question. But they still do talk about something as transcription and occasionally looking for story ideas, but not. It was very clear that people were not comfortable talking about it as story writing still, which is fine. It's not a criticism. It's not that there are no podcasts out of television newsrooms, but the typical number of podcasts that come out of TV newsrooms is 0, unlike radio, which, by the way, where did John go? Just because you had said, all right, well, we'll talk to him later. Oh, there you are, way back there. If you go to NAB, to BEA, I'll be presenting this with radio numbers as well, so if you have an interest in that, I'm happy to share with you, because we do survey news directors across all broadcast newsrooms. And next-gen TV, still not really a thing. I mean, it's a thing, but it's not a thing in newsrooms yet. The investment is there, but the fact that people aren't turning on television sets is probably a reason why this isn't taking off, perhaps at the rate that people wanted. It is my understanding that next-gen TVs are essentially for 4K video, so once 4K video becomes, if it becomes popular enough and people want to spend money, then I suppose the convenience of being able to target ads to folks through 4K ATSC signals will become a reality. Staffing. It is down. This was a final quarter 2024 survey, so it's further down now. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody who's following all of the layoffs, which are, personal opinion, wholly unsettling. I doubt it's a argued opinion. But we're down 2.9% from the year before, from the last quarter of the year before. Average TV news departments employ 41, well, economics term, we'll call it 42 people. There's no half a person. And the typical news station at that time when we asked the question had 2 unfilled positions. My guess is that number went up. And 73% of news directors said that they could fill the position if they had found a good person to do that work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they were free to do so, right? They weren't necessarily offered the opportunity to do so. Let's see here. So at the top left, you'll see the population of people of color in the United States in general. I recognize that this also includes children. I don't have a way to separate that out, or at least I didn't when I built this slide. But 41.6% of Americans identified as not white in the country, whereas the TV workforce is sitting at 28.1%. That breakdown for TV newsrooms is as such, so we are looking at 72% white journalists, 14.2% Black African American journalists, 11.3% Hispanic, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders at 2%, and a teeny tiny percent of Native American journalists. These categories are reflective of the census. So it's because we do this work over time, if we were to add or take away anything, then it makes it difficult to compare year to year. So I recognize that there are categories such as Middle Eastern, North African that we don't see identified here. I'm not really sure if anybody is a much better doctor of this than I. I'm open to suggestions of how I might expand these categories without dismantling my data, but I have yet to discover what the answer is to that question. So feel free to flag me down later if you are that expert. I am not really sure what to do with the population in terms of gender in this country at this time because the definitions are changing on us. So I'm being a little sassy about this, but we'll just say that about half of the population in 2024 identified as whatever that the free definition of female at the time. And not quite half, but almost half of the workforce, so similar numbers for this category. For a few years now, we have asked news directors if they have any openly LGBTQ plus members in their newsroom community, and this year, 77% said yes, and then when we isolate to transgender, this is news directors saying what they believe to be the case, right? This is not me asking individual workers how they identify. We were looking at 18.5%, so in other words, 26.8% of news directors said they didn't know in terms of transgender, and 20% almost said they didn't know in terms of LGBTQ plus in general. The number of folks in the first year, this is year 3 that we've asked this question, the number of folks in year 1 was minuscule. People did not want to answer this question. Radio, fun fact, much worse at answering this question than TV. Is what it is. Do with that what you like. The numbers went up pretty dramatically in terms of people answering the question last year, and now it started to dip. So I don't know, again, I'm guessing there's a relationship between my original statement and the way these numbers are falling in terms of people wanting to talk about this topic. I didn't interview the people who took the survey, so I can't say that with 100% confidence, but again, my good guess. Trust and worker safety. We asked people what they're doing to improve trust with their audiences. 60% of news directors said they were doing something. That something broke down into these 5 categories. So offering more transparency to the audience in terms of the process of doing this work, doing better versions of this work fell under people's interpretation of this question. Talking about how good we are at doing this work fell under people's interpretation. Providing, I don't know why we don't collapse this into doing good work, but investigative and enterprise stories. I guess there were enough that we thought it deserved its own category. And differentiating themselves from national media, again, I guess, but maybe to do with Fox affiliations versus Fox Network, or NBC affiliations versus NBC Network, I'm just assuming. Threats to news workers overall, 50% up from last year's reports. That's an unfortunate statistic that I do not enjoy. And specifically in the top 100, it was up 15% or more, which is really, I mean, it was an election year, so I understand that happens, but still. And we do ask if they use MMJs because we imagine that there's a relationship between these issues in terms of safety. So yes, half of newsrooms mostly use MMJs still. That number is starting to slide down, right? We had a peak several years back, but now we're seeing a drop. Again, a good guess would be live shots and being alone out in public. I know, not from this survey, but just anecdotally, that several newsrooms have taken the logos off of their vans and their cars, and they don't wear the logos on their jackets anymore. So, you know, this is all tied in together. Yeah, 10% are saying they don't use them at all, and another 10% are saying that they do use them, but not very much. Here's your I make normal bad amounts of money slide. So I love showing this to my students because I want them to understand public service has a downside. So that doesn't mean you don't do it. It just means you have to start out with realistic expectations. So good news, salaries did beat inflation this year. The just barely is that salaries went up 3.2%, whereas inflation in general was up 2.9%. This time around, right? So we did better in that sense. Last year, the smallest markets and lowest paid did the best, and this year the rich seem to have gotten richer. I suppose rich is a relative term, but larger newsrooms, they went up, 95% of their positions went up in salary, as opposed to the tiny staffing markets where it only went up 21%. Average starting salary, $39,000. Yes, ouch is correct, thank you. With a median of 38. So, you know, if you want to think about it as the typical versus the including the weight of the larger markets. So 39,000 as an average or 38,000 as a median. And, you know, fun fact, if you normally graduate from not journalism schools, your chances of making $60,000 or more a year is much better. But of course that does include if you're going to be a physician or something else that a pushy mother would ask you to do instead. Yeah. It could be why 73% of news directors said they found it harder to recruit, either replacements or new positions, so probably not a coincidence. Two more slides for you. Also kind of upsetting. Why are they leaving? Why are these folks leaving? Mostly more money. I don't think that's surprising. I just showed you the slide. 64% said work-life balance. I think for anyone who works in this business, we understand why. 52% said burnout. We asked the question a little differently last year, but it is still reflected in this one. 25% said they got promoted or they're leaving the business altogether, but didn't specify where. That's a different question, another slide. And 4% actually did say that that safety number is a reason why people are bailing on our very important industry. If they left, where did they go? They went to PR.
Yeah.
I don't think we're surprised to hear that. Or to work in government, although that was a 2024 survey, I will remind you. And I'm not sure which jobs are available for people to go to at this point. 56% said another newsroom. So they didn't leave the business. 29% said some other version of leaving, but we didn't specify where. 9% said teaching, that is relatable. 3% went into real estate. That seems like a really good job to transfer from your MMJ skills, your live shot skills into real estate skills. And 3% said they actually went in the other direction than we've heard so many years now of folks leaving print and coming to broadcast. The pendulum is now swinging the other way. So, I mean, it's 3%, but still it counts. And then one sassy news director decided to say, anything they can find that pays better. Wow. So that was, yeah, we enjoyed that particular quote. I said I'd do it quickly, I did it quickly. That's the end.
We know we have questions. We've got a couple minutes, so let's do it. I'm going to hand the mic over to Seth. Hit me. Right there.
So, sorry if this is a little bit of a rant, but I was wondering, have you ever talked to anybody that might do similar work as you, like SmithGeiger, in other countries, and how to see how because like the whole conversation around authenticity and whatnot, like the trend I'm kind of seeing is just a lot of people are trying to return to like community and finding a way to feel connected to other people in you know, just I think there's a lot of like feelings of isolation and whatnot, and I think that plays a role in all of this. So I'm just kind of curious, in America, you know, we're like a car society. I'm wondering how like this all compares to other countries. Are all the trends the same?
So I would certainly characterize these as macro trends.
Yeah.
And the macro trends driven by fragmentation, the macro trends driven by just the ascent and the dominance of social media as at the very front or head of the news cycle, the explosion of news sources. I don't have specific data of this type of kind from other international locales and markets, but the macro trends are certainly consistent across, at the very least, the first world within that, and then I would extend that to include certainly places like Brazil. The exceptions are obviously countries that control the media flow of information, and so those are going to be the exceptions. But I would be surprised if we found dramatically different dynamics at play in most of these places. Yeah, yes.
Just a question about the social media part of your survey. What was the date of that information? We did talk about the RTNA survey. When did you do that surveying?
The survey is done in the fourth quarter, not fiscal quarter, but calendar year quarter of the end of each year.
Because I'm from the legacy newspaper, Christian Science Monitor, just down the street. And we went from like 300 Blue Sky followers to 18,000 in 3 weeks after the election. So I'm just curious in terms of the time, whether those numbers would have jumped if you did it later.
And it's entirely, I mean, that's reasonable. Yes, it's entirely possible. I don't know if did it jump and then level off, or is it still on an upward?
Yeah.
And we're still on X, Twitter, and everything else. It's just that we were just toying with it in September, and then looked at the numbers and started taking it a bit more seriously.
I see no reason, I'm not in charge of this, but I see no reason why, if you already have workers who can produce content for such a platform for the same effort, right? Why not use it? But you may have a different view.
I think that's an excellent example of the disconnect between where the audience is moving and how slow the media is to respond to it. So that data really reflected the adoption of Blue Sky within the newsrooms, not the adoption amongst the media consumer.
Greg here? Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
I'm curious if, you mentioned that brand allegiances are thin. I'm curious if you have any data on whether allegiances or relationships with personalities in the newsrooms.
Oh, that's a great question. So we really look at, not all news consumers are equal in the local television space, and we define them on a scale of depth of affinity to high level volatility. The most high affinity news viewers we term core loyalists, and they have strong talent affinities and tend to have held allegiances to their favorite station for more elongated period of time. 10 years ago, 24% of local news viewers were core loyalists. Today we're at 7%. Yes, it's not a good thing. So most of the audience has been pushed down to making daily decisions, again, based on situational criteria, based upon what they were exposed to earlier in the day. So that has diminished the power and the stickiness, if you will, of the talent relationship. That being said, we just conducted the most comprehensive analysis of talent ROI in the media landscape today. We looked at over 330,000 data points that we have on talent all around the country. And we found that it is a predictive factor, not a determinant one, but certainly a predictive factor. And it's more predictive for those that are more on the loyalist side than the coverage-driven news audience. The biggest takeaway we got is statistically, you need to grow your talent awareness 7 points to translate into 1 point of affinity to the TV station itself. But you need to grow your talent performance 20 points to grow affinity 1 point. And so that's really rechanged the way we think about what the relationship is and how we're promoting and fronting talent within the context of the entire news ecosystem. So now we're working with our TV clients to think about creating a total talent impression metric across all of these platforms. And it's why you need to extend beyond linear. Again, another reason why social presence is so important. But we're moving from a talent first to a coverage first world, for sure. Yeah.
I see all of your hams, but I'm a producer who's upset that we're
Relatable.
not getting out. I bitch about the Oscars doing this every year. So I'm going to take the last question, and then I would love it if you said hi to Keren and Seth later and ask them more questions. Like, what's one thing that's making you hopeful right now for local news, journalism, and video storytelling? Keren?
I have an answer. I have a 16-year-old. And I have an 11-year-old as well, but the 16-year-old is actually, engaging in the world right now in a different way. I think he's the reason why I'm feeling encouraged, because he's starting to pay attention in a very real way. So I know we talk about 18 to 24-year-olds or 25-year-olds, but I think 16 and 17-year-olds are shopping for political views right now and deciding who their friends are. That's causing some division in his high school. So I think that level of energy of caring about the world, that's doing it for me.
Well, that is encouraging. I didn't have time to get into kind of the solution to the conundrum that I identified so cogently and scarily, I suppose. But it's our job to not only help our clients understand the dynamics of what's happening, but to address those dynamics. And so there are a number of things where we are working directly to help ameliorate some of these particular challenges. One is to elevate the power, and I think Nika alluded to it, the power of process journalism. By process journalism, I mean we need to be more transparent. We need to engage more with our audiences. Our storytelling needs to embrace and include as an intrinsic component a sense of how we gathered these facts, what process went into it, the commitment that we've made to getting the story right around that. And then that then becomes the building block to reorient from social reality to facts being the building blocks that dictate and determine a deeper and a greater, commitment to the truth at this point. And so there is a mechanism to do that. It probably falls under the category of what's old is new again. Those are practices that many newsrooms used to integrate more readily into the process. It's not easy. There's a whole set of training mechanisms that need to be put in place from a writing and a storytelling perspective. But I would really encourage this next generation to think about storytelling where it's not perfect at the end of the story, but there's a component where the audience is brought along on your journey. I think you alluded to that as well around the bodega story. Those are going to become really important components of storytelling moving forward as part of this process.
Thank you both. We really appreciate it.